Good afternoon, all of you. So I see about 18 participants here. So Ms. Kalyani, would you tell me what is the demographics here? Are they all startups or are they individuals as well?
Yes, Professor. They're all startups, few from our ecosystem. It has also been populated for external startups, our Tide centers, who are ecosystem partners. So mostly early stage startups who are looking to understand more about design products.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll get sharing my screen in a minute. So are you all able to see my screen?
Yes, Professor.
So the talk is was titled Unassembly. So the idea being that we have assembly, and can we look at deconstructing what assembly um, looks like and what are the guidelines for it. So one of the reasons why I am particularly passionate about this topic is that you will see as we go along. I'll give some examples as I go ahead in my presentation. That indeed, assembly makes a very strong impact on the final user experience in terms of a design of a product. So often what I find is that people do not give much attention to uh, various aspects in design, and particularly manufacturing and assembly. So the talk is structured, of course, as a regular lecture format. But in case any of you has any questions, if these questions are simple questions, go ahead, raise them. Let us make it interactive. But if you think those questions require some more elaborate answers, then you can hold them till the end, right? So I expect that we will be done in about an hour or hour and a half, and then we can have about 20-30 minutes of discussion. Okay. Now, just a note: in about 20 minutes or so, I may have to step out briefly for a couple of minutes, and then we will continue. So I mean, this is the outline of the talk. Firstly, I'll discuss what are the outcomes of this talk. The talk will mainly consist of two parts actually. One, we look at certain heuristics and some oral and verbal guidelines on design, and then we will also look at a quantification of improved assembly as such. And finally, we will look at further guidelines by digesting these ideas and see if we can come up with further and refined guidelines for assembly. So the learning outcomes are, in general, DFA here stands for Design for Assembly. So what are the gains from studying DFA? So one thing is that we do not often understand the assembly constraints in design. So even today, majority of the design is done based upon whether you can fabricate something or not, whether based upon how easy is it to fabricate something, based upon what materials are easily available, based upon what is the cost available to you, and so on. Very rarely people think about, okay, if these are the parts and these are the products, how easy is it to assemble? You may ask, what is the attraction of doing a nice assembly? The attractions lie in various things. Particularly, why I got into this is because I work in the area of maintenance or maintenance, and no maintenance happens without disassembling a component. And the more difficult it is to disassemble a component, the more difficult it is to really maintain it. So one of the early examples of this was, I work with underwater robots, and indeed some of our early robots were like, I don't know if you've heard these kinds of fables in when you were growing up. At least when we were growing up, there were these stories where a villain is searching for a hero, or a hero is searching for something to rescue his princess. And where is this? This is beyond the seven seas. beyond the and then beyond the 7 seas, there are some 7 labyrinths, and like that, there is a series of challenges after which you get to your chosen destination. So similarly, if even if a PCB component failed inside the underwater robot, we had to disassemble the whole casing. Then we had to disassemble all the surrounding accessories. Then there were what do you say, wirings and so on, that we need to carefully move aside, and then finally get to your target, and then perform that inspection again, put it back, and then only you will be able to test it. So this process used to go on for, disassembly used to go on for a couple of days, assembling back another couple of days, testing another couple of days. So a minimum of a week, even if a simple fault was happening inside the product. So finally, we realized really this is not going to work, and we went ahead and redesigned the whole thing. Today, we have snap fits, we have simple assembly guidelines, such that any fault diagnosis, when it is done, disassembly happens within half a day, assembly back, and then testing the same day. So that's the improvement that we have achieved. So these are things that we must really remember when we are doing product design. So those are the gains as such. So you will understand assembly constraints in design, be able to get some insights as to how poor design impacts, has a chain reaction on other features of the product. We will also see some learn about some quantitative metrics. Actually, what is ease of assembly, how do we identify problem areas, and how can we come up with alternative and simpler designs. Finally, I will also cover the aspect of layout in terms of design. Okay. So now, what is design for assembly as such? So what are the basics? So design for assembly is actually uh, a set of guidelines and some thoughts to improve assembly information at the concept stage of design itself, in a very organized manner. It is not a disorganized and jumbled up way of looking at things, but we are looking at a very systematic approach to design. What does it do? It gives a procedure for evaluating a design, especially on the aspect of ease of assembly. And there is a feedback loop so that the design can be simplified and improved even at the initial stages itself. Then DFA, the practice of it actually consists of generating detailed databases on assembly times. I may not have time to completely go through this, but I will have occasion to quickly refer something like this. So essentially what it is that, uh, for example, if in a shop floor, you have a conveyor, and then each bay, a person at each bay is assembling, putting together, let's say, a mobile phone. Then each mobile phone will consist of various parts. You will have uh, the base or the chassis, and then you have the electronics, and then you have the chips, and then you have the screen, and then you have the whole assembly as such. So now a person has to collect many of these things from bins surrounding them, right? There will be some bins in which screws will be placed. There will be some bins in which tools will be placed. There will be some bins in which the various constituent components are placed. So you pick them one after the other. The sequence in which you pick them and the amount of time it takes to handle them, all of these are studied in a very detailed manner in as part of design for assembly. For example, can any of you think of a common component used in design? It could be nuts or screw and so on. Please name a couple of them. Let's say, can any of you name a couple of commonly used components across various industry segments in products?
One can be, hi, Arjun here.
Yeah,
One can be washers, another
very good.
can
let's
be
let's say washers.
adhesive,
Okay, another is
adhesive, let's say sealant.
sealant. Okay, very good. Okay, now you have touched upon a very brilliant point. Actually, this washer, right, is a dangerous thing in design. Why do you think I'm saying that? Why do you think it is a dangerous thing in assembly?
I wouldn't know, but ideally I would guess
See,
design
essentially,
doesn't
when
need
you
a washer.
when do you have to use a washer? You have to
Uh,
use a washer when there are two different parts that are to be joined together using a nut. Okay, then you put a washer in between, and then you put you put in a screw, and then you put a washer, and then you put a nut on the other side, isn't it? So the key here is the alignment actually. So you fix the bottom component, you screw in the you screw in the screw, and then you put the top component, and then you put the washer, and then on top you put the nut, isn't it? Getting this alignment right is not is not easy, it's not trivial, let us say. So you need a jig first of all to hold the bottom, and then you need a precise people have laser pointers actually to make sure that this alignment is proper. If the alignment is not proper, your screwing is not done properly, your bolting is not done properly, and your washer itself may lose its purpose itself of why it is. Okay, so on the other hand, an adhesive, if you are to join two components, there is no I mean, alignment is there, but it is not so important, because here I don't have in a washer scenario, you have a screw, you have two mating parts, you have two washers and a nut, right? So uh, two mating parts anyway are there, but one screw, two washers and a nut, so four parts, four components, right? So you have to draw four components from four bins, keep them at your place at the desk, and then you need to get the sequence right, whether you keep the top part of the mating pair in the jig or the bottom on the jig. Where do you send the screw in from? How do you hold it in place? How do you align the other mating part in here? So all of this will require time. On the other hand, an adhesive, you fix these two parts, you put the adhesive there. The only thing extra is like a heating gun. You heat the whole thing up and allow it to dry. So while the curing may take time, the assembly itself will be surprisingly much lesser amount of time. So if you take some guesses, if I'm not wrong, in the Boothroyd method, Boothroyd and Dewhurst were scientists working in industrial engineering. They have actually studied the time it takes to perform all these different little operations. So I think if you tabulate it, it may come out to be about a couple of minutes to perform a washer involved assembly, and it may take maybe half that time to perform the same joining operation using an adhesive. Okay, so that's the how these things are different. So DFA studies all of these things, and it also studies what is manual assembly, what is robotic assembly, what are the how do we help these assembly processes. So things that a robot can get very right very easily are not the same for human beings often. For example, if the kind of alignment I'm speaking to you about, a robot can get it easier, because all it requires is place the part in a very precisely defined coordinate position, put the other one over there, and then screw it in. So for the robotic assembly, something like this may be a very easy task. On the other hand, a robotic assembly would struggle if you have a unconventional assembly process. If suppose you have to take decisions on the fly, you are on the shop floor, and the conveyor keeps bringing to you different things to assemble, right? The first thing you're assembling is an iPhone of the series 12. The second thing you're assembling is an iPhone of the series 8, right? So in this manner, if you assemble, then you have to take decisions which the robot is not programmed to do. So manual operation here becomes critical. So wherever decision making is required, manual operation can be more suited to it. Wherever algorithmic decision is possible, robotic assembly will become faster. So one is a heuristic, one is algorithmic. So those are the differences as such. So this is what you are likely to gain from a study of this subject. Let me warn you, this is a very vast subject. There are venerable books written on this subject. The biggest handbook of this is by Boothroyd himself, and it's a 400-page tome, really. So it is a subject to study, but I hope to give you a glimpse in this lecture, and it is going to be very technical. So I hope that is to your taste and liking anyway. I'm assuming that each of you has a burning desire for improving your assembly process as such. So let us start off with some general guidelines for manual assembly, and you will be surprised by what you will see. Okay, so what do we mean by manual assembly? Manual assembly typically involves handling of components. So handling, as I said, is things like acquiring. So let us say a certain process involves 3 fasteners, 4 snap fits, 2 mating parts, and let's say a container on top of this. So you need to acquire all these parts. You need to orient them in the right manner. As a jig, you need to position it and then you orient it in the right manner, moving the parts to these locations and then carrying out your operation. Then the manual assembly also involves insertion and fastening. Okay, so connecting one part to the other or a group of parts and so on. Okay, so this is a illustration of the manual assembly scenario. So you have fixtures, so you have an operator, then you have a workbench, then there are bins as such, and then this is the overall layout of the workstation. Okay, so what happens? This is the sequence I'm going through. So for example, the operator reaches into the bin, okay, then grabs the part, then transports and orients the part, and then pre-positions it. Okay, and then you have fastening can happen, assembly, sub-assembly can happen. Okay, so this is what is the important thing, is that this process, so manual insertion for example, is affected by both the part geometry as well as the parts to which it is placed and fastened. So Arjun, isn't it, you mentioned about a washer for example, right? It I mean you may not have spent some time on it, but it is easier to grasp a screw than it is to grasp a washer,
Oh
isn't it?
yeah, it's quite
Okay, so you
very
put your hand into the
thin.
bin. Actually, getting one washer out is a big problem. So you need to think about these kinds of what do you say, considerations as such. Now, on the other hand, an automated assembly, how does it work like? So you have a conveyor belt, you have a robot working in there. These are various workstations, and there are feeder bowls, right? And then you have let me just, sorry about these animations. Okay, so you have parts which are emptied into the bowl feeder, transmitted one after the other. This is algorithmic, as I said, instead of heuristics based as such. So firstly, so let me stop here. Okay, does anybody have any thoughts or questions or concerns up to this point? So what I have so far seeded into your minds is that assembly is an important part of design, and indeed you have to think of assembly in a very systematic manner. And assembly consists of a series of tasks which include grasping and transportation of the part to the workbench, and then orienting the part, and then performing the actual assembly operation. This is different between manual and automated or robotic assembly. Okay, so let us look firstly on some heuristic guidelines on part handling. So I wanted to pause. Sorry. So anybody has any comments up to this point? Any questions or comments? Are you all with me? Are you able to follow these points? Do you agree with me? Disagree with me?
Yes, sir, we're following you.
Okay, so make it a little bit more interactive. Okay, so if you disagree with something that I'm saying, please feel free to express your opinion, and if you have some questions, do not hesitate to, or comments, do not hesitate to raise them. So with those words, let us start the first part of this talk, which is in terms of some guidelines for part handling. Okay, So and these are in no particular order. These are just some well thought out guidelines that have emerged over a period of time, after many people have performed certain operations, and then they have jotted together these points. Okay, so first thing is that is the point of symmetry. Okay, so it is always recommended that parts have end-to-end symmetry and rotational symmetry about the axis of insertion. Can anybody tell me why this is so important?
Hi,
Yeah,
Ashik here. So it would be good for poke yoke.
it will be good for, sorry.
Foolproof, like poke yoke. Hello.
Yeah, I foolproof, I understood. After that, what you're saying, I'm not understanding.
Poke yoke. Yeah, like it can be put in either side, like while assembly.
Exactly. Okay, that is important in the sense that the orientation of a symmetrical part is much easier compared to a non-symmetrical part. So let us say that uh, with a symmetrical part you have to turn it 90 degrees and bring it to that position, and it will work only in that position. Non-symmetric part, sorry. With a symmetrical part, on the other hand, it can work in any other position. So, for example, here is an illustration of a cylindrical um, uh, cylindrical fixture, a cylindrical component, and what is symmetrical is on the right. That means that if you grasp this part from a component from a bin, for example, first of all, it's very easy to grasp it, and you can there is no need to pay attention to the orientation. It works on either ends. Okay, that way this is important. Here is some discussion on symmetry. There are two kinds of symmetry for a part. So alpha symmetry is depends on an angle which a part must be rotated about an axis, and beta symmetry um, is um, is an angle which a part must be rotated about the axis of insertion to repeat it. There are some illustrations I'll show you. So alpha symmetry and beta symmetry as such. Okay, so okay, I'll 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 allow you all to ponder over these two statements, and then you can do some working out in the next slide. So when you take an insertion operation, let us say about this, so there is an axis of insertion. Okay, so alpha symmetry is the angle that a part must be rotated perpendicular to the axis, and beta symmetry is the angle that it must be rotated parallel to the axis as such. Okay, so now with that, can you guess the alpha and beta symmetries of these different parts here? What is the angle with which you have to rotate this part perpendicular to the axis? Let's say the first one is like a disc or like a washer, you know, clearly in parallel to the axis, I mean, along the axis of rotation insertion, there is no angle here. So beta symmetry is zero really. Okay. But on the other hand, alpha symmetry is that I have to rotate at least 90 degrees to bring it over there. Right. So if the like a coin, right, I need to rotate it to bring it to the axis. So I think I mean, I myself am fumbling over here. So yeah, I think the first one was a sphere actually. That's why it's not a disk, it is a sphere, and therefore there is no angle really to the sphere. The second case is a cylinder, and in case of the cylinder, then the alpha symmetry, that is, you need, if it is flat, you need to turn it 180 degrees to bring it to the axis, and then the beta symmetry is symmetrical in the along the axial direction, so beta symmetry is zero. Now, on the other hand, if you had a square peg that needs to go into a square hole, for example, like the cylinder, you need this 180 degrees you need to turn, but over there in the beta direction, it is is 90 degrees as such. So now take a screw, for example. Okay, so the alpha symmetry is 360 degrees. On the other hand, the beta symmetry is 0. So you can see that several of these are the component on the last actually is the most difficult in terms of assembly, because there is no symmetry over there. So you need to rotate it completely to get to that point, both in the perpendicular direction as well as in the parallel direction as such. Okay. So the guideline we said was, designed to have end-to-end symmetry and rotational symmetry about the axis of insertion. So as far as that guideline is concerned, the first two parts, components here, a sphere and a cylinder, are the best as such. Okay, because, and also the screw, that is also a cylinder. So those are the three parts that are the best as far as that guideline is concerned. Whereas a square, a rectangle, and a stepped rectangle, for example, do not have that symmetry along the axial direction as such. Okay. Now, so in cases when the part cannot be made symmetric, for example, if it is, you know, so try and maintain this as far as possible, essentially. Okay, that's what we say here. Now, the next guideline, and this is something that is often ignored, is that, and manufacturers do not think about these things. So that is why design people, especially who are involved in assembly, needs to give a cue to people involved in manufacturing to make sure that this happens. So, how many number of times you would have seen, for example, you go to a shop, you want to buy a mug or a bucket, and then you find that some 10 mugs and 10 buckets are attached to each other, right? Now imagine you have to do this on the shop floor. You're assembling something, and then in the bin you put a hand into the bin, and then you find that some 20 things are stuck together, and you struggle to pull it out. So a acceptable design as far as assembly is concerned is one on the right. Not acceptable is one on the left. Okay. Then avoid features that allow tangling of parts when stored in bulk. So things like curtain rod rings. So if you go to a store and then they try to pick one for you, you will find that if they have to pick 10, they have to untangle from 100 to pick out 10. So it is the role of the assembly engineer to make sure that the parts components are designed in such a way that they cannot tangle with each other. Then this is obvious, but sometimes these guidelines are not followed. So make sure that you do not have parts that stick together, that are slippery, that are delicate, that are flexible, unless those are required to be so. Okay, of course you cannot have parts that are hazardous to handle, but sometimes you end up with parts that are sharp, that have rough edges, that have splinters and all that. So all of these are very important for manual assembly as such. Then make sure that there is very little resistance to insertion, and provide chamfers to guide insertion into mating of two mating parts. So that is why in the first figure I showed you here, there are chamfers here. The purpose of these chamfers is that if you have a hole through which this has to go, for example, this chamfer will guide that process. It will help you to position your component into the hole. So and also provide enough clearance as such to avoid parts to jam or hang up during this insertion process. Okay, so here are examples. So when you have to insert a, let's say, a disc into a hole, if you the one on the left jams easily, but on the one on the right, the part cannot jam. So it is very easy actually to design a C type of section rather than have just a disc C type of cross section. Okay, so the one on the right will avoid a jam. The one on the left, if you have it, good for you. you will spend the evening trying to untangle these jammed parts. Okay. Then if you have blind holes, for example, it is always recommended to have a air relief passage at least on the other side. The reason being that, one, you can at least see, and if there is an issue, you can visually inspect it and find any problem as such. And and then if there is a blind hole, for example, you cannot even look inside while the insertion operation is happening. So if you allow a light to come in, then it is easy also to perform that insertion operation as such. Then here is another example of something that is easy to insert. Okay, so the first case, uh, you know very difficult to insert. In the second case, it is much easier for you to insert, mainly because this hole, you've provided a further extension of this hole such that you can easily align the axis of the insertions. Okay, so I spoke about the provision of chamfers for ease of insertion. So for example, you're inserting a spring into a holder. Now, if there are sharp corners, for example, then there is only one way in which you can get this right. So you need to be able to see it very clearly, which takes time, by the way, on the shop floor. So you'll waste time. But on the other hand, if there is a chamfer, that will neatly slide in and reach the target position much more easily. Then okay, so standardization is very important, and I cannot emphasize this enough as such. So this is a very key difference when you make made to order parts and when you are going to mass manufacture parts, for example. Okay, so if you're making made to order products, then you can get away with using maybe 3 different sizes of bolts and nuts and screws in 3 different parts of your product, or you use one size in one product, another size in another product. But this means that you cannot process higher volumes as such. So wherever possible, use standard parts, standard processes and methods. So for example, if you're choosing a metric system, M24 screw, have M24 screws all through um, in your product. The threading is, if you're choosing a threading, if you say you are using one type of threading, Butterworth threading, choose that. Don't keep shifting between one to the other as such. Okay, here is another guideline in terms of insertion and fastening. So I hinted this in the beginning. For example, when I said when your friend Arjun here spoke about washers, right? There is a very precise way in which when you the screwing operation works. So here is an example. So when you have to insert several mating parts one on the other, it is easier if it is a peg type of problem. So in this case, the screw is coming from the bottom, then you insert first nut, then the component, then the first washer, then the component, then the second washer and the nut. Now imagine that if this is happening the other way around, okay, it becomes far more difficult. So wherever possible, you provide, where if suppose you have to use screw type of threads, actually one design guideline is never use screw fasteners. As much as possible, remove them. I will even quantitatively show this later on. Okay, so pyramid type of assembly is recommended. Then avoid holding down products, okay, because that means that your orientation becomes that much more difficult. Okay, so if you holding down is required at all, then design in such a way that the part is secured immediately upon insertion. This could even be done by magnetic methods, for example. Okay, so here is a example um, of a scenario where I think several of us would have struggled with something like this, although we have not done assembly in a mass manner. So sometimes DIY products come, and it is frustrating that you have to insert a screw into a hole, but the hole is located on the other end actually. Okay, so it is always recommended that you hold before release rather than release and then hold. Okay, so this is how you aid the insertion process. Okay, then this is the sequence as such. um, Increasing the manual assembly cost. So snap fit is the easiest, right? Plastic bending is next, riveting is the next best thing, and screw fastening is the last. But whenever I look at designs that new product engineers create, they always have, like, some 300 fasteners. So somehow people love fastening processes, but there is always a way of eliminating them. You can do snap fits, you can do screw fits, the various types of newer and newer methodologies, you can do that. Okay, avoid requirement for repositioning partially assembly, completed assembly in the fixture. Okay, so for example, if you have to put screws on opposite ends, right, so you need to keep a part on one side, you put two screws on it, then turn it around, then put another two screws on it, and then use this whole sub assembly, connect it to something else. This is a very, very bad example of design as such. Okay, so that was a very quick canter through certain guidelines. Of course, this is only a subset and a selection of these guidelines. In any design handbook, you will find hundreds of such guidelines. And these guidelines clearly, as you can see, also depend upon industry to industry. I'm specifically looking at mechanical industries here, but you can also, these kinds of guidelines will be there in other industries. So it's essentially overall assembly, minimize part count, minimize, use of separate fasteners, try fixturing features on a base part. So if you have screwing and fastening operations, there should be a base part which you can hold on a fixture and then perform everything on top of that. So that becomes your sheet anchor as such. And then minimize repositioning during assembly and optimize the assembly sequence. So as I clearly, in this pegging example, for example, it's very important to sequence it like this rather than the other way around. Okay, so sequencing is very important. So this is all in terms of assembly. Now, as the sub components are concerned, you should make it easy for the operator to retrieve parts. So as I said, try to avoid jamming, try to avoid tangling, try to avoid have parts that are easy to grasp, and try to avoid small parts that can hurt the handler. Right? Please avoid those kinds of things. Then as far as the that is for retrieval, handling is concerned, parts should have end-to-end symmetry. Symmetry about the axis of insertion, that is very important. Okay, so if there are non-symmetric parts, make them clearly asymmetric so that it's very easy to grasp and use them during the assembly operation. Then as far as mating is concerned, straight line motions are important. Have chamfers and have features that facilitate insertion, and design for maximum maximum accessibility. Okay. Now these are just some general guidelines. These are obviously verbal and oral guidelines. Okay. So, but there are drawbacks to this. So this is not quantitative, first of all, and then there is no ranking as far as the guidelines is concerned. So how do we know which design is helping in improving the assembly operation? Which of these is improving the overall efficiency? How do we estimate the improvement by doing the part redesign? These are all things that cannot be answered by these general guidelines. Okay, and finally, okay, these are only some heuristics to give some background. Okay, always an approach is needed to provide the designer with an organized method, and we should also have a systematic way to improve the design as such. So I'll stop over there. What I've covered in the next part is certain heuristical guidelines to improve assembly process. I'm sure that some of these are common sense, but common sense is not that common as they say. How many of you have seen hundreds of times that these kinds of exact things that we know should not be done are actually done routinely, isn't it? Any common assembly process has every one of these examples. You go out into the market, there are dime a dozen examples of every one of these, and our products are riddled with these kinds of assembly flaws. Okay, so I'll stop at this point, again breaking for a few minutes. If you have any thoughts or comments or concerns, we can discuss that before moving forward.
And maybe I'll start off. Um, so this is just to evaluate the sort of pros and cons and spending this much more extra effort in the design for assembly. Typically, do companies have, say, a dedicated budget to look at this design for assembly in itself? It's just like, say, for example, they do say design for reliability or design for easy use. How much will that typically be?
See,
I
I
know
mean,
this is quite
traditionally people wouldn't do this, but because they are not doing this, they are actually, harming themselves. Because as I said, with my example with which I opened this session, we used to make underwater robots, and it was like a, gargantuan exercise to do fault diagnosis. Robot is not working. No, I must figure out how it is working. Just to get to that central core, it will take 3 days, because you need to open 12 fasteners, and then once they are opened, you have to make sure that the wires are not cut. A very delicate process. You have to then carefully untangle them, and then remove the central core, and from there you go to the processor, and then you do the diagnosis, and then reassemble it back, and then again this whole process, right? So many big corporations now do realize all of this. So there is a significant budget given to improving the assembly operation. So, but because several of you are from backgrounds which are early stage startups and all that, and may not have a design expertise as such, so I'm pointing you out that this is very important indeed. If you do not have the budget, please budget it, okay, for your own good.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so essentially, see, Arjun's point is there a utility to doing this? Why should I do this? Essentially, he's saying. I mean, I'm getting away with what I'm doing, isn't it? But you're getting away doesn't mean that you will not get caught sometime. If the product that you are selling, develops a fault, for example, you are going to go through hell to do this. Okay, so that is the only one utilitarian constraint. There are many other constraint, practical reasons for improving the design for assembly. When I give you some examples as we go forward, it will become very clear to you. Any other questions or thoughts or comments at this point of time? Give me a few seconds. I'm just going to go drink some water and come back. Okay, let us continue. So far I have impressed upon you that there is indeed a need for improving design assembly as far as the design is concerned, and I shared with you some common guidelines for improving the ease of assembly. Now, let us look at some quantitative ways in which you can look at this design as an improvement in terms of assembly. Okay, so we'll go from a simple approach to a more sophisticated approach. Okay, so the first approach. Uh, so what are we trying to do here? We are trying to do we are trying to find ways in which we can reduce the part count in a particular design, because that is one of the goals of assembly. Now, the key goals of assembly is, can you have as minimal number of parts as possible? Now, indeed, you will see later on that this is all, I mean, it will also occur to you that if you minimize the parts, hey, you're gaining, money out of it. The more the number of parts you have, the more money you are burning, actually, ultimately. Unnecessary parts, in my opinion, are the biggest add-ons to product cost as such. People fill their products with fasteners when it is not required, setting up the chain of reaction leading to early failure, because every fastener is a stress concentration location. So every additional rivet that you put into your product is the source of a future accident as such. So we have to minimize the number of parts. Okay, so the first way in which we quantify this is a simple technique. So what we do is we find the theoretical number of components, okay, by examining a pair of components in the design, and to see whether they really need to be separated from each other. Okay, so for example, things such as bolts, nuts, and clips should be involved in this, what we call accounting. Okay, so this is how I define components to be need for separability. Okay, so the components must be separate if the design is to operate mechanically. The components are made of different materials, or assembly or disassembly would be impossible if they are located together. Only in these circumstances can you justify that the components must be separate from each other. Okay, so the quantification we do this is in terms of a parameter we call improvement potential, or IP. This improvement potential is defined as Na minus Nt by Na times 100, okay, where Na is the actual number of parts, Nt is the theoretical minimum number of parts, and number of components within your product. Okay, so then this is the thinking that if IP is less than or equal to 10%, then your current design is outstanding. If it is between 10 and 20%, it's very good, and so on, all the way until if your IP is actually more than 60%, then really your design is very, very poor. Okay, let's look at a example. I'll actually suppress this the solution part of it here. Okay, so let us say this is a file, a filer. Okay, a filer has a handle, and it has a couple of pegs as well. Okay, actually it's not a filer, it's I mean it's some kind of holder actually. Okay, so you have a central part, then you have a holder, and then you have two screws going into two pegs as such. So can you please analyze, each of you, put pen to paper and tell me what is the IP for this product. For that, of course, you need to agree upon, firstly, you need to evaluate these things. What is the theoretical minimum number of parts? What is the actual minimum number, actual parts in it? The first one is more easy to do. Okay, Na, the actual number of components in this product is how many here? Can you count and tell me? Anybody? How many actual components are here?
Professor, there is a answer 15 that is being posted in the group chat box.
There are 15
Yeah.
components here. Now let us see. How, let's see what number you come up with for what is the theoretical minimum here actually. And this theoretical minimum hinges upon this point here, right? So two components, it is justifiable for them to be separate only if it is required that they are made of different parts, okay, or they must be operating mechanically separately, or that the assembly or disassembly becomes impossible if they are joined to each other. With these criteria, please think about and tell me what is the theoretical number of minimum components required in this product.
Professor, 7 is an answer we got in the chat box.
Okay. Can you justify who gave that answer 7? Can anybody justify why you're saying 7? Yali said, you said 7. Can you justify why is it 7? Arjun says it can be 1. Okay.
So Yali has replied, we can use rivets instead of bolt.
Whoever is the representative from Yali.
Yeah,
so
if you can unmute and speak also, it will be great.
Yeah, you can speak also.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Sir, actually, I joined the meeting after 1 hour.
Okay.
Can we use rivets instead of walnuts? I thought that will be a minimum number of components.
Fine. But my question to you is joining required at all in this case?
For the handles, joining is necessary.
Okay. So then, but why are you saying 7 then?
So we can use 2 rivets to join that handle. And 2 rivets, I don't know which part is this, that yellow color piece. So we can use 2 rivets for that yellow piece.
Okay. That's good, but let's look at one solution here. All right. This solution need not be, you need to agree with this. So I assert that the theoretical minimum, and I agree with Arjun here, is just 1 actually. Of course, it depends upon whether this handle really needs to be of a same material. But typically, you can do away with this handle get away with this handle being same material, unless this product is being used in an electrical situation where the central bar is, conducting electricity or heat, for example. But on the other hand, if it is just a, handle, it is given only to get a better grip on the product, then you don't need to be for it to be really a different material. Okay. So that way, if you take the minimum number to be 1 only, actual is 15, you get the improvement potential to be 93. So it's staggeringly a poor design. So if you look at another design for the same thing, where indeed you have taken the actual to be 2, I have not taken the theoretical minimum. Okay, the theoretical minimum is 1, but actually you have 2. Okay, then you have a improvement potential comes to 50%. Then you have a fair design. Okay, so that's how you can use this concept of improvement potential to improve the overall design from the assembly perspective. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now some further guidelines as such. Okay, minimize the overall part count. As I said, combine wherever, you have, 2 or more parts that can be integrated. As long as you do not require these 2 parts to move against each other or have some mechanical operation which is requires them to be separate, do not think of separate parts. Okay, we think of separate parts only because from ease of manufacturing perspective, but the assembly perspective is, is a clarifying perspective. Then always minimize the use of fasteners. Okay, always. And if possible, never use fasteners. Okay, each fastener is a very difficult component to handle. If you put it in a bin, the operator is going to struggle to grasp these fasteners. The operation time increases like anything, and so on. Fasteners are not cheap, by the way. If you take the overall, uh, fasteners are actually the biggest component to cost in any major product. I was talking to somebody in Airbus the other day, and then they were saying that, can you guess how many fasteners are there in a typical aircraft, passenger aircraft? How many could be there? Fasteners or rivets, older fasteners are now rivets, let us say, but even riveting is a process where grasping is not easy. Um, and the assembly process is not easy. So how many fasteners are there in a typical passenger aircraft? So there are,
Actually,
yeah, go on.
we don't know the count, but I think the whole flight is made up of rivets joining.
Pardon me? Are made up of
Rivet joints only.
rivet joints only. So there will be hundreds and thousands of these. And fasteners are all stress concentrators because you are, damaging the material in this process. You are drilling through it. So you're creating micro cracks. And most of the time, if you look at accidents, major accidents across the world started from, these fastener and riveting locations. Cracks come, develop at the at the joint location itself. Okay, so an outstanding design will have very few separate fasteners. Okay, and those also will be standardized. Okay, and a guideline is something, if more than 1/3 of the components in a product are fasteners, then your assembly logic should be questioned. Okay, then rule number 2, as I said, is the same thing, continuing. So there are various, modern techniques by which you can avoid fasteners. You can have sliding fit, you can have snap fit, you can have mold in pins. So I recommend you to please study this subject. There are good books available now. You can study them and incorporate these features into your designs rather than incorporating fasteners as such. Okay, so for example, instead of having 4 fasteners like this, you can have 1 fastener. Okay, if you make them, if you think a little bit, if you analyze your product a little bit. Okay, so here is an example of a sliding fit where you do not have any pins at all. Okay, now rule number 3 is that, as I said, design the product with a base component. Here is an illustration as such. So the base component in a meter assembly, for example, the base provides a foundation for component location, and then it gives is a basis for fixturing, orientation, etc. Okay, so we spoke about the improvement potential approach, and then we've taken some further guidelines. Now let us look at a more advanced technique, which is the Boothroyd-Dewhurst method. Okay, so this improvement potential method will only work in some simple examples like this. Here it's very easy for you to say, okay, these are, 2 things that don't need to be separate. Separate. I will join them all together. It fails when you start dealing with more complicated products. And Boothroyd and Dewhurst, scientists who worked on industrial design at American universities, came up with this approach. Okay, so there are 2 main factors in terms of assembly efficiency. And this also is for disassembly efficiency, is the same thing, really. Okay, so how many number of parts are there in a product? This is very important. You have to tabulate and see include all the fasteners in it. If you are having 10,000 parts in your product, sorry to say, not a good design. It might be a great prototype, but it is not there as a product. Second thing is, what is the ease of handling, insertion, and fastening of the parts? Okay, so the Boothroyd and Dewhurst method involves the creation of a DFA index. Okay, this DFA index is called EMA. Basically, this is for maximum assembly, okay, or minimum assembly. So this is the efficiency is defined as n min times TA by TMA, where n min is the theoretical number of parts, TA is the average assembly time for a part that presents no handling, insertion, or difficulty challenges. So the top is actually your minimum theoretical time, and then the bottom is the actual time taken to complete the assembly. So TA on average, for example, it is estimated over studies after many many campaigns that on average it takes about 3 seconds. That is the minimum possible time for a part that presents no handling, insertion, or fastening difficulties. But in reality, the timings are very different. I do not know if I have I do have some timings here recorded. Okay, so the Boothroyd Dewhurst chart actually is an extended chart. It runs into several pages actually, and it is continually being developed. For the first time, it was developed about 20-30 years ago, but more recently there are newer and newer improvements and additions to this approach. Okay, so how do you get the value for a theoretical minimum number of parts? This is an ideal situation. So as I said earlier also, separate parts can be combined into a simple part unless you encounter one of these difficulties here. That is, relative motion is required, okay, or parts must be by stipulation of different material. So for example, in this first example I gave, maybe the bar over there is conducting, whereas you need to have the handle to be insulating. So you need to, for them to be of different material. So you cannot really eliminate them as such. You cannot really combine them as such. Then finally, the parts must be separate from all other assembled parts. Okay, so that maybe there is a requirement for that. Unless you meet one of these requirements, you can combine parts wherever possible. Okay, and there is an elaborate classification system in this BD method. This is what I'm going to call it as we go forward. Okay, there is systematic arrangement of features that impact acquisition, movement, orientation, insertion, and fastening of parts. Okay, um, so the classification system consists of 2 digits. Of course, I'm not expecting that you will master this system in the course of my 1 hour, 2 hour lecture, but anyway, just a glimpse for you into this world as such. Okay, so the classification system consists of 2 digits, which identifies the row and column in the table. So an example table is here. Okay, so this table is for parts that can be grasped and manipulated with one hand without the aid of grasping tools. So sometimes grasping tools may be required. You may want a tongs to grasp something. Okay, you may want to have a cutting plier or a plier actually to grasp something. But this table is for parts that can be grasped without the use. So you can, with bare hands, you can grasp these. Okay, so that is one type of table. And in this table, there are, you can see there is a column numbering and a row numbering. 0, 1, 2, 3 are all row numbering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is all column numbering. So there are two codes, two digit codes actually. So the portion of classification system there are classification system which is separate for manual as well as automated situation as well. So so for example, let us look at this particular table. Okay, and here also the system has, in addition to saying that these are parts that can be grasped and manipulated, those are also not less than 6 mm. Okay, they do not stick together and are not fragile or sharp. So those are the kinds of parts that fit this bill. Okay. And then on the left, you see there are various symmetries actually. So alpha plus beta. So if alpha plus beta is less than 360, then your part is considered to be very symmetric. Okay. But on the other hand, if your part is completely unsymmetric, if it is 720, for example. Okay. So that is 360 in alpha and 360 in beta symmetry. Then if you have no difficulty handling, then you have certain digits. If you have parts that can tangle or nest, you have certain digits. Then thickness and size all are included here. Okay. And what are the numbers here? These are the numbers that Boothroyd identified. These are time in seconds actually. So if a part is very symmetric and its size is more than 15 mm and it is more than 2 mm in thickness, you see that, and it takes only a second, about a second, to assemble it. You take it, you've grasped it. It's very easy to grasp. It is visible because it is more than 15 mm. That means 1.5 centimeters. Below this, you will not be able to see the part very well, right? So if it is more than 15 mm, and 1 second is sort of the minimum time, about a second is what a minimum time they have found. How they have found this is they have gone to shop floors across America and performed controlled experiments with the use of digital clocks, and they have classified and quantified the assembly time as such. And on the other end of the spectrum, you see a part that is small. It is only about 6 mm in size, and it is less than 2 mm in thickness. So that can take about 5.6 seconds for you to assemble. That is on the higher side. Okay. So let us look at an example here. So here is a spring assembly. Okay. In my regular class, I would have people to perform this analysis because I give out the chart and ask them to look at the whole thing. But here, for example, I'll run through this for you. Okay, what are all the different components here? There is a screw. Okay, and these screws are 2 in number. These are made of steel and they are not easy to align. Okay, then there is a cover sheet. It is not easy to align. Okay, and the worker's fingers must be used to align the edges. There is a spring. Okay, and it must be steel. It has closed ends. There is a piston stop, and there is a piston itself, and then there is a main block which is made of plastic. So please note the materials are specified. The what is the ease or difficulty associated with these components is specified. So let us look at the BD index for this product. How is it calculated? So as I was mentioning, there are detailed charts like this. And in these charts, the time required for assembly has been tabulated. So what you would do is that for each of these parts, for example, the main block, you would go and the one part like this. So the handling code is 30 here because that 3 refers to one of these 2 digits here. Okay, so 30. So from that chart we obtain the handling time. So the chart will have handling time. It will also have insertion time in it. Okay, so here I think I gave only handling time here, but there will also be insertion times given as such. Okay, so from that we calculate the total time as such. So that is acquisition time plus the number of items times handling time plus insertion time. So in this case, the number of items is only 1. So 1.95 plus 1.5, that comes out to be 3.45. So that is the total time required for handling the main block. Similarly, the piston, right? So here in the piston case, the handling code came out to be 10, and in which case the handling time is 1.5 seconds. The insertion code was 10, and the insertion code, based on the insertion code, the insertion time is 4 seconds. Okay, so this is the overall time in this case. So again, there's only one part, so you just add 4 plus 1.5 is 5.5. In this manner, you perform a detailed calculation and overall you add it up. So you get the total time as such. Okay. And the theoretical minimum here. Okay, so the theoretical minimum would have to be evaluated, and then here actually, if you can see in my improved design as such, the fasteners have been eliminated as such. Um, the piston
I think Professor Prabhu just got disconnected. Can you just wait a few minutes for him to join back?
sorry,
Yeah, Professor Prabhu, yeah.
I got disconnected. I think.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. There is some network issue going on in our campus.
Sure, Professor.
From 5:30, they said that there is going to be no network. Hopefully, for the next fine.
Sure, sure. Just the last few minutes, we just lost you. That's all.
Okay. So what I was saying was, you can, I showed the original design and then a modified design, and then uh, you can calculate the uh, index, Boothroyd-Dewhurst index as such. Okay. So another example. So here is a example where you have two fasteners, nuts, washers, um, bolts, basically two nuts, two washers, two bolts, and a disc to which a bracket, a bearing house needs to be aligned properly. Okay. Similarly, here you perform this calculation. Obviously, it won't be very efficient, but actually speaking, you do not need those fasteners at all. Okay, you can have two types of redesigns where you can have the disc sitting on a peg or one peg or two pegs. It depends upon whether this is oscillating or non-oscillating, sorry, rotating or non-rotating, and the BD index will come out to be much better for these parts as such. So basically what I wanted to impress upon is that there are quantitative techniques available for you to analyze and improve your design. And it is important for the designer to appreciate that every one of the components and parts that they include in the product has a bearing, has a certain cost and impact on the assembler, right? It can, in the worst case, it can lead to even hazardous situations. In the best case, it leads to cost adding up, piling up for the company and also for the product as such. So to summarize certain manual assembly guidelines based on all we have seen so far. So eliminate the need for workers to make decisions. So for example, if there is chamfer only on one side, then the worker has to think, okay, is this the right, he picks up something, okay, is this the right side or not, then turn it around. Okay. Eliminate such decisions. Ensure that accessibility and visibility are there. So your shop floor should have good lighting and all the bins should be located in an accessible manner. So eliminate the needs for assembly tools and gauges. So wherever possible, have self-locating parts. Parts should be able to be grasped by the bare hand itself, etc. Now minimize the number of different parts. Again, I cannot emphasize any number of times on this. So even now, despite students going through, I'm giving you one lecture here, but actually I have a semester long course on this, on product design. Students come out of this course and still they make a product with some 300 fasteners. Please give a divorce to this love affair with fasteners. Come out of that, minimize the number of different parts, minimize fasteners, avoid orientation during assembly, okay, and prefer easily handled parts that do not tangle or nest with one another. Okay. Now, in terms of automated assembly, Okay, so those are all things in terms of manual assembly. I think after a few slides, I will be done. So these are some points on automated assembly. Okay, so obviously automated assembly happens in an algorithmic manner rather than a heuristic manner. So you can reduce the number of components with the same guidelines I gave before. Use self-aligning and self-locating features. Avoid screws and bolts. Use the largest and the most rigid part as the base and a fixture, and perform assembly in a layered bottom-up manner, right? So this is just an example of um, bolts, as such, various bolt studs, this 101 engineering drawing as such. Alternatives, you can have rivets. Okay, alternatives are metallic joints, sheet metal joints, sorry. um, then I'm just running over, summarizing and bringing together with some examples as such. Don't do as the left, do perhaps what is on the right as such. Okay, don't do this. Can anybody tell me why I'm proposing this? Why I'm saying do as the right, something as in the picture on the right?
I guess it's quite difficult to reach.
Accessibility. Okay, excellent. Okay, don't keep fasteners, if you have to keep them at all, too close to each other, because that is going to be disastrous. Okay, I always think of improving accessibility to the part. Okay, so impossible to do something like on the left. You have to hammer the bolt, actually bolt head, have something like place for the bolt head to sit. Okay, um, eliminate, just for bling purpose, you might want to put a mug with extra ring on the bottom and all that. Where possible, just have one integrated product. That's the best for you. Okay, standardize. Do not have different sizes, different lengths, different systems, different threadings. Have standardized systems. Okay. Modularity, that's a very important point. If you have a big assembly, try to have subsystems and sub assemblies, and that way even your fault diagnosis becomes easy. Okay. Maximize part symmetry. I've told that already. As far as possible, have symmetric products, because otherwise the operator has to think about what is the correct orientation, is the fixturing okay or not, uh, and so on. Eliminate tangling. Okay. This is a very brilliant point. If you have a disk, for example, and these are different sizes, color code them, so that 10 mm and 8 mm are not very distinguishable by the bare eye, but if you color code them, then you can distinguish them. Okay. um, Provide features for orienting uh, small elements in the design. Have chamfers wherever you require um, alignment. Try to have insert snap fits. Okay, try to insert new parts into the assembly from the above rather than from the bottom. Okay, so wherever there are insertion, try to provide certain guides for the insertion rather than making the job of the assembler miserable. Okay, insert in the same direction. Avoid turning operations during the assembly process. Okay. So can you guess, tell me now, finally, some quiz questions. What is wrong here in this component? What is wrong here in terms of assembly? Anyone? What is wrong here?
Professor, we have an answer in the chat box that says jamming.
Yeah. So what is wrong here? The thing is, the chat is difficult to access when you are talking.
Yes, Professor, I'll read out if something comes up.
In
Yeah.
this image, I think the bolt head cannot be flattened.
Yes, Very good. Okay. What is wrong here?
Correcting, getting the correct alignment is difficult.
It's nearly impossible. Okay, the assembler will struggle with that. Okay, so that's it in this very brief lecture. I hope I have given you an overview of the design for assembly process, given you some general guidelines for manual and automated assembly. I've given you two approaches to quantify the DF, the design as far as assembly is concerned, and we clarified and obtained some final and refined guidelines for manual assembly. I am happy to take questions and address any concerns here.
Thank you, Professor. Opening out to questions now. Participants, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or you can even put it down in the chat box and I can read it out to Professor also. Professor, if you don't mind, I would also like to start off with a question.
Sure.
I do not have a technical background. I'm just asking from my basic understanding. So please do excuse that. So I know there were several guidelines that you mentioned. For example, how the parts need to be aligned. How do you, they should not jam into each other and things like that. So at what stage do you think they need to start, like if it's a product startup, are these things they need to keep in mind from the beginning, or do you suggest there's like a certain intervention where they can use these concepts to optimize the product?
I would
What in your
always
experience is
I would
best?
always say start from the beginning.
Right.
Good habits are made at the start.
Right,
So,
yeah.
for example, uh, I can ask a question: when should a child start brushing their teeth?
Right.
Right. The answer to that is soon as they have teeth.
Right.
Because
Sure.
you don't want bad habits to set in. So every one of our startups, I would want them to invest and think about good design. And good design is not just for pleasing somebody; it is for yourself also. Okay, design is a detailed subject. People have spent lifetimes looking at all these things. So
Right.
please, I would ask all startups to respect that process.
Mhm. So speaking of, there are several materials available. Do you have any courses or something that you can suggest to a participant, Professor, just to get, if they want some deeper insights into this, certain books they can read up? Do you have any
So,
recommendations?
I think right off my head, I'm not able to immediately tell, but there are a couple of very good references actually.
Sure.
But I will.
You
I
can
will
let me know,
suggest
Professor.
yeah.
I have the
Yeah.
participant list. I will certainly circulate it among them also. So opening it out to participants, if you have any questions, please do ask. Or if you come up with questions later, please do share it with me and I can run it through Professor and get back to you on a solution. So
See, the key point is for all of you, I'm assuming that many of you are product companies here, is to have somebody look at design in a technical manner. Many of us grow organically. In fact, my startups have also, been like that. We come up with nice concepts, go about fabricating them, 3D print them, make them in the lab, and then we start working on them. But we rarely pay attention to, design as a formal process. I know that designers can cost you a lot, but there is no harm. Maybe you can even hire a consultant to help you on this. But product design is an important part of your product life, product cycle, as such, product lab to market cycle, and spend some time on and get a good design going.
right. So thank you, Professor. If there are no more questions, I'd like to wrap the session up. I would certainly, if questions come up, I would certainly populate it and send it across to you, Professor. So thank you so much for engaging with us, going into such detail, and even the formulas of like a handful of easy to use formulas that they can keep in mind. So thank you so much, sir. Hope to have further sessions with you later. So thank you. Thank you, participants. We'll also be sending out a feedback form. Please do fill it in and circulate it back, which would help us improve our further sessions also. We would also hoping to have a workshop on this topic sometime soon. So we would reach out to you if things get scheduled.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Have a good evening.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Professor.